Welcome to the 75th episode of our Crossing Thin Ice podcast series, where twice a month we tackle risk management topics. I'm Max Rudolph, and today my partner Dave Ingram will continue our VUCA series, this time addressing uncertainty and how our thinking about it has evolved from linear to higher order interactions. From basketball games to business strategy, nothing is static, and every choice and reaction becomes input for the next decision cycle. Our aim for these Crossing Thin Ice offerings is to help with your ERM program and general risk knowledge. We encourage you to share with anyone interested in lifelong learning about risk management and welcome your feedback. As a reminder, nothing in today's podcast is intended to be investment advice. We are here to provide educational material on risk topics without getting lost in the weeds. Let's get started.
Uncertainty, a key part of the four horsemen of VUCA, is always a problem. Uncertainty takes away the most powerful tool of an actuarial risk manager, the ability to use analysis of the past to produce detailed insights about the future. Today, we're faced with a new kind of uncertainty, strategic uncertainty, I call it. That makes planning any strategic decision-making that much more difficult as well. With artificial intelligence, we have a brilliant new tool to assist us in many ways. For strategy work, AI can quickly give us information about customers gleaned from our own records, from marketing information about prospects, and competitors and product information about the performance of our products and our competitors' products. We're in a new age of enlightenment about the status of our business and the prospects for the future. But at the same time, we need to realize so are most or all of our competitors. And with the help of AI, we become much more formidable competitors. The same transformation is happening to other companies as well. The situation reminds me of a story from John Maynard Keynes from his book, The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money. There he said, professional investment may be likened to those newspaper competitions in which the competitors have to pick out the 6 prettiest faces from 100 photographs, the prize being awarded to the competitor whose choice most nearly corresponds to the average preference of that group, so that each competitor has to pick not those faces which he himself finds prettiest, but those which he thinks likeliest to catch the fancy of the other competitors, all of whom are looking at the problem from the same point of view. It's not a case of choosing those which, to the best of one's judgment, are really the prettiest, nor even those which average opinion genuinely thinks the prettiest. We have reached the third degree where we devote our intelligence to anticipating what average opinion expects the average opinion to be. And there are some, I believe, who practice the fourth, fifth, and higher degrees of that. We have AI helping us to pick the best strategy, but so do our competitors. So we instruct our AI to imagine the new strategy of those competitors, assuming they are using AI to recommend strategies based on data that it has gathered for us. And they instruct their AI to do the same. We have entered into the spiral of analysis that Keynes describes. And we are totally uncertain about how far along that path our competitors might go. So we have gone from relative certainty that we historically had about our competitors' strategy to a totally new age of strategic uncertainty. We are not yet completely sure how we will react to the AI strategic suggestions, so we certainly cannot tell what the competitors are going to do. Meanwhile, that imagining of our competitors' next move falls outside of the sorts of things that AI would be good at. So we gain lots of data, but the price we pay is that we also end up with a difficult new uncertainty. AI works by pattern recognition, and once we cross the line into a world with AI-assisted strategy reformulation, there will be no data, making AI relatively blind. Each new decision made in anticipation of competitors' AI-informed moves us further and further away from the world of past data that informs AI. When people think of strategy and AI, many remember the famous chess match between Deep Blue and Garry Kasparov. Many people think of chess as a highly intellectual game where the smartest player wins. But there are major differences between a chess game and real-world business. The most significant 3 differences are that there are large but finite number of possibilities in chess. The board and pieces stay the same throughout the entire game. And all information about the game is right out there in the open, and both players know it. Big Blue won the chess game because it was specifically designed to play chess and to do an exhaustive analysis of the future repercussions of every possible move, and to choose the move that had the highest possibility of leading to a checkmate. That makes chess a deterministic problem. Business strategy, on the other hand, has an infinite number of possible future moves. The business environment, which in chess would be the game board, and the customers and competitors, the pieces, are constantly changing, and most of the important information is hidden. Each of these differences leads to a weaker and weaker capability for strategic thinking by AI. Success at chess simply does not imply that AI can be a successful strategist. Because of these extreme complexities of the business environment, strategy is not really led by analysis in most systems. It is most often led by intuition, which for the foreseeable future means human intuition. But humans are prone to finding patterns where there are none, of putting more weight on evidence that fits their going-in conclusions, and a myriad of other biases. AI has a valuable role that it can play to help with those biases. While it might be a bad idea to depend on AI for initial ideas about customers' and competitors' plans, AI can be invaluable in validating human insights. AI can tell us whether our intuition is consistent with all of the evidence and help us to back away from wrong conclusions and to fine-tune the intuitions that are good, but just not perfect. There will come a time when AI has been with us for a decade or several, when the data starts to accumulate so that AI can help more and more with strategy, at least during stable times. AI, at least the AI as we currently see it, is not able to see around corners, to envision the regime changes that we have been talking about at Crossing Thin Ice for several years now. So while the human role might be diminished, vigilance by humans will be even more important. Humans will still be needed to make plans that envision a world that is different from what the data predicts.
Dave, the speed of artificial intelligence means the cycle between stability and instability will be compressed. How do you propose changing an organization's annual strategic planning process to accommodate these shorter, more intense cycles? What specific metrics would you introduce to signal that a stable regime is ending and a new, unquantified one is beginning?
We need to think differently about that annual planning cycle. I know that some companies are really, really religious about that. And I think that's a problem in an uncertain environment, because we don't know when new information is going to come in that we're going to be able to see a little bit more clearly. I kind of think of the uncertain environment as if you're driving in a fog. And I don't know how much you ever do that, but I live near the coast, and so there's lots of foggy days. And when you're driving in a fog, you can only see so far. And so you have to be ready to, as you see something, adjust what you're doing. And that's the idea of the uncertain environment. So that making a plan for far ahead is not necessarily the most useful thing. So you do need to be continually adaptive there. Some people, when you talk about metrics for looking at that, some people want to look at how frequently things come up that cause them to deviate from their plan or their planned environment, and how big those deviations wind up being. That's kind of a very self-referential idea of measuring that. Maybe that works. I'm not sure. I've never been that good at predicting the next year, and I've never seen plans that included an accurate prediction of the next year. So I'm not sure about that. My metric is a little bit simpler than that. I just look at how many times the word uncertain comes up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I remember looking at that in 2009, 2010, and finding that word used on the front page of the Wall Street Journal 25 to 30 times in a day. Just a day picked at random when I looked at that. So when things are really uncertain, it's noticed, and you can get that kind of outside signal.
Yeah, I would say with the stability comment, it's very hard to do any type of optimization and incentive plans tied to those annual strategic plans without stability from all causes. I think it's not just artificial intelligence. I mean, you have extreme weather, financial side, high debt to GDP. All of these, we've talked about regime change. These all tend to feed that same process. So it's an interesting discussion. You talked about the beauty contest effect, where competitors' AIs anticipate each other. If you were designing a strategy for a company in a highly competitive market, how would you instruct your AI team to actively break from the consensus pattern? And what's your tolerance for the risk of being completely wrong?
I would like to try and divide up the decisions into smaller decisions so that completely wrong is a lot less likely. If instead of making one decision about how to approach a product or a market, if you made decisions about segments in that market, or segments of customers, who use the product for different purposes or something, and making separate decisions for each of those, and paying attention and collecting information about each of those segments. That's what I would use as my protection from being just totally wrong, is that I wouldn't make one decision. I'd make many decisions out of it.
Yeah, the example of a company that I've seen do that is Progressive on the insurance side. They've used telematics, and so they've ended up with the good drivers. They actually measure who's driving within the speed limit, who's doing silly things, and they end up focusing primarily on the better part of that market. Another thing that I think of as you talk through that question, again, back to regime change, we talk a lot about our metric that we use is often GDP, but a lot of times can do something that improves efficiency, but it doesn't improve GDP because it improves leisure or some other non-metric, some metric that really isn't as measurable. That's kind of interesting as well. Let's talk about the artificial intelligence and human divide. Should a company adopt an immersed model where everyone talks to AI, or a layered model where only specialists talk to AI? Which model do you believe is better suited for a business that relies heavily on client trust and long-term relationships? And what specific organizational structures or rituals would you put in place to manage the inherent risks of that model?
That's a great bunch of questions, and I'd have somewhat different answers to each of them. So I'll try and unpack that and try and remember all the parts. I'm very much in favor of the immersed model. I think that AI is going to have a potential impact on many, many areas of the company. And I don't think that we don't want to have the haves and the have-nots within the organization. I think that everybody needs to have some experience with AI. Everybody needs to have some appreciation for what the strengths and weaknesses are of AI. I think actually that one of the biggest risks to companies right now is the fact that the executives making decisions about AI implementation often do not know enough from personal experience about AI. And so they are listening to other people's descriptions of what AI can do, when, in my opinion, some of those descriptions are, well, they're highly speculative. Let me say that people are describing AI capabilities in terms of what they think the capabilities will be at some future time. Instead of what they are now. And people who are making decisions about using an AI system now need to know the difference between those two things. And so far as what different people's role is, though, I think there are quite a number of different layers there of roles. There is a layer of all the people that would be using AI mainly as a personal productivity assistant. And there, I'm thinking that you learn to use AI the same kind of way you've learned to use the internet, where for certain types of things, you'll always go out to the internet to help you find something. Certain types of questions, you'll always go out to AI to get some assistance. Just as with the internet, you never trust exactly what you're getting from the internet. You should never trust exactly what you're getting from the AI. You should always have a critical opinion of that. And that's one of the most important things that I think everybody needs to touch AI to be able to get that sense that it has some great stuff and it has some weaknesses. And then there are the people that will be working with AI to get their jobs done, not just the personal productivity assistant, but actually performing their function. And I think that actuaries will see a lot of that, helping with different steps in the actuarial modeling processes. But I don't see AI as being end to end in there. And I see some actuaries will take on a role that is called human in the loop. I call it actuary in the loop, which is a quality assurance role. That means doing the kind of thing that I just mentioned everybody should be doing, but doing it for actuarial work that the AI assists with. And then there's going to be some actuaries that'll be heavily involved with AI. They'll be the ones that'll be helping to create the applications that the actuaries, that second group of actuaries will be using. And those people will also be capable of working hand in hand with the model. I call those folks the actuaries in the model. And I'm thinking of it as a totally different way of working. As opposed to the traditional way that's existed for 50, 60 years of working with a computer, where you set up a job, you run the job, you get the output. That's the traditional computer system. With an AI system, I think it's possible for the actuary to be involved with that system processing all the time as it's going along, to be getting interim results, to be challenging things as they're going along, so that the actual end result is a collaborative result between the AI and the human. And I think that's a place where we want to get the absolute best result from AI, because AI has some things that it can do that humans can't do and can do them much better. It has some things that it's very weak at and needs the human assistance on.
Well, Dave, I really agree with your immersed approach overall. And as you're talking about the actuary and their potential role, I'm thinking of Elf on the Shelf, where you have actuary on the shelf, where he's or she is reviewing everything that everyone's doing and becoming aware and trying to look at the results in aggregate across everything that they do. I find that really interesting. One of the other things you didn't mention, but I know you've talked about before, is that when everybody's involved, you get better buy-in on the process. So that's a kind of a side benefit of the immersed method, in that everybody's using it, and so everybody kind of buys in that that's an approach that has value. And I think as everyone gets more used to it, that kind of feeds on itself. Doesn't mean, as you said, you still need experts and the people who are driving the process, but even having your board members and your C-suite having some knowledge of artificial intelligence and using it on a regular basis, I think that makes it much easier for both your top-down analysis as well as your bottom-up analysis.
Yeah, and I think there's a little thing in there, which I don't even think of that little, is I remember first learning spreadsheets. I learned a little tiny amount of that from documentation or training. 90% of what I learned about spreadsheets, I learned from other folks that I worked with and saw what they did with it and were able to copy that. And the work I've done with AI, I'd say at least 75% of that work that I'm doing, I've picked it up from somebody else. Sometimes extended it, sometimes just copied and said, this is a good thing, let me use this.
Yeah, and others are learning from you. So, what comes around goes around. Dave, the best firms may need people who can move seamlessly between artificial intelligence conversation and human sense making, the so-called translators. What 3 competencies would you look for when hiring or promoting a translator in a team? And how would you structure their incentives to value both technical fluency and human coherence?
First, let me just remind folks what these translators are. They're the missing link, I think, in AI implementation. There's a well-discussed study by an MIT affiliate that said that 95% of major AI projects failed, published last May. One of the things that they pointed out in that study was the missing link of these folks, people who had domain expertise and enough knowledge of AI to be able to talk knowledgeably with the AI developers. There are very, very few of those people. If we're going to think about the speed of implementation of AI, the speed at which AI is going to change things, going to take over work, it's going to be limited. This is, I believe, the limiting factor is these folks. But if I'm looking for somebody to do that, the best people at least are the people who are able to explain carefully what AI can't do, or the things that it doesn't do very well, so that that mistake I mentioned earlier of executives expecting too much out of it, that they're able to engage with the executives and be able to convince them that maybe this particular application has to wait. Because AI is just not ready for it. Or if we do this application, we need to have a much bigger human touch in it as we do it. Usually these folks, another characteristic of them I would want is that they're people that don't have a conviction that they know what the future is going to be. So that when they think about the future, they think about multiple possibilities. Because I think that's the best any of us can do right now. Things are so uncertain. We really don't know what the next branch is on the path that we're on. The third thing, I'll give you two things and call it the third thing. The third thing is they need to be a good storyteller, and with that be a teacher. I think there's a huge amount of teaching that needs to be done about AI. You mentioned I share stuff. I really struggle with this part of it, the being able to come up with these stories, because I'm just learning the stuff. So it's a real challenge to come up with compelling stories that can help people to learn this. I think that since a lot of this AI stuff is very new, almost everybody's in the position that I'm in that way, is that they don't have stories from years of experience. A lot of us have a year of experience, and I think what was it? The second birthday of ChatGPT was celebrated just last month or the month before. So it's not a long time for most people in getting exposed to this.
I have one more question for you, Dave. The challenge of living with AI is not a lack of data, but an overabundance of plausible AI-generated insights. So noise disguised as insight or noise disguised as signal. As a leader, what specific filters or constraints would you impose on your team's use of AI to ensure they're cultivating judgment rather than being overwhelmed by information?
At the supervisor manager level, I think what they need to make sure is that they don't have anybody who's gone too far into the time that they spend with AI. So they need to make sure that there's a balance for folks. And maybe that means that the leader has to schedule more meetings. I don't know exactly how to do that, but making sure that people don't sort of go into the rabbit hole. One of the really, in my mind, difficult things there's a couple of very difficult things to work with AI. One of them is the fluency of AI. It sounds like it knows what it's talking about all the time. But I think even worse than that is that they've programmed it based on feedback as to what people like, and what that has resulted as is an AI system that constantly is giving you compliments on how smart you are. Oh, that was a great response. It's silly because what I've kind of come to doing is sometimes if I want to get some kind of information, I'll say, well, somebody else told me this idea and I don't think it's any good, but what do you think? And that way I get a balanced response. Whereas if I say, this is my idea, it'll say, great idea. Here's all the reasons why you should get a Nobel Prize for that, almost is kind of where it goes.
You need that honest feedback.
Yeah. And the other way you can get it is also by asking for, what would be the counter argument to this or something like that, and it will answer your questions that way. It's not it's not like consciously being a supporter. It's really just following the lead of how you say things. I think that there's a broad training need with regard to AI, is to get people to understand how to use AI as an assistant rather than treating AI as the new Google, the new way of getting an answer. Because I think that expecting to have an answer after you've just thrown one question at AI, I've seen statistics of how frequently there are errors on that are just mind-boggling. Somebody did a test recently where they were just asking details about a news article. They found that over 50% of the time in the answers on the most popular models, they were getting small errors creeping in. And the longer you continued the question, the more likely it was you were going to get an error. People need to have a lot of training about that, and about how to ask the questions right, what kind of questions to ask, so that, like I said, it's asking for help rather than for a conclusion.
I mean, you've talked about it before, but if we use artificial intelligence as a tool as opposed to a guru, that seems to be the best way to look at it. One question that I always like to ask, when I'm trying to come up with conclusions is, why could I be wrong? And it's probably a good way to look at artificial intelligence as well, as look at the answers and say, well, where do I need to double check some of these answers to make sure that they're not just feeding me something, hallucination or some other false factoid. That's interesting, though. I think a lot of this discussion is new for people from an artificial intelligence perspective, and I think it really adds value to some of the work that you're doing on it. So thanks from your audience. I'll thank you for all that you're doing on this stuff.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
The downtime between regimes is becoming ever shorter, with uncertainty a key reason why. Artificial intelligence speeds it up even more, with competitors trying to anticipate how others will react to several decision cycles at once. The immersed model reduces the risk of over-reliance on AI, but it is just as important to have translators who can interpret results in a way that understands goals and improves outcomes. We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Crossing Thin Ice. If you found it valuable, please like, subscribe, and share with your colleagues.